What's up, everyone? This is Quentin Figueroa with Slayermint.com. And in this video, I'd like to talk to you about how socialism is the opposite of self-help and a loser mentality. Okay, so let's first talk about what we mean when we say socialism, because it's kind of a broad definition and it means a lot of different things to different people. Most people, when they're using it, or at least more in America, when you hear the term, it's talking about government like doing something like welfare and that kind of thing. But the more hardcore socialist people that actually kind of are more into that term and that movement, they would define it more along the lines of worker control over the means of production, or some type of negation of capitalism and capital, which generally translates into the abolishment of private property. So, that's kind of the way socialists like to look at it. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, that's how it's defined, right? But there's more to it than just that, because if you look at most socialists, they share certain characteristics with each other. It's no different than how capitalists, people into the free market and this kind of stuff, they share certain characteristics that are different than socialists. And then if you look into, say, religions, right? Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Islam, these different religions, the adherents of them, they also share certain characteristics. And somebody who's a Christian might not share the same, say, like characteristics or beliefs or outlook on life as somebody who's a Hindu, right? They're going to have kind of a different take on things based on their ideology. Right? We understand this with religion, right? Christians, there might be similarities in that Christians believe in God just like, Muslims. But certain parts are going to be different. Like, what are the characteristics of this God? What happens when you die? Like, these kind of things, it starts to vary. And people generally latch onto or attach to the religion and the ideology that kind of resonates with them. And of course, people are born into certain religions and the religion that they're born into, that happens a lot. But there's also people that might be born into a religion and say okay, well, I don't really agree with this religion anymore. I like this other religion more. Like, I'd rather be a Buddhist than a Christian or something like that, right? And of course, some people are like, I don't want to be in a religion. I just want to be, atheistic, or I don't want to have a religion. But these are all ideological decisions saying this foundation for life is what makes sense to me or something that resonates with me. So I'm going to adhere to that. Okay, so that's what's going on with religion, and the exact same thing is going on with socialism and other forms that could be called like opposite of socialism, like capitalism and free markets. So socialists, they latch onto a definition that kind of fits with their ideological foundation for life, right? There's certain characteristics of socialists that makes socialism appealing to them, where certain characteristics of capitalism and free markets makes that appealing to those people. So that's kind of what I want to go into and talk about how it kind of ties in with self-help and this kind of stuff. Okay, so let's talk about freedom, because everybody wants freedom. Everybody, if you ask people what their goal as far as society or what would be a good thing to kind of work towards, people would say freedom. The problem is everybody has a different definition for what freedom is, right? So to a capitalist, freedom might mean something like do whatever you want so long as you don't harm other people, right? Kind of this non-aggression type outlook. Free to do whatever you want. I'm going to leave you alone, right? A socialist, on the other hand, it's a lot different on what freedom means to them, right? Because to a socialist, freedom is more about kind of getting a group of people to act a certain way in order to keep, certain groups or people from kind of being held down or held back. Socialism is more about kind of equalizing classes and other inequalities throughout the world. It's to try to even things in the way that they see. And in order to achieve this socialistic view, you have to force people to do things. You have to kind of interfere with people and say, look, we're going to make things go this way because it's better for everyone as a whole, right? So when you look at this view of freedom, which is pretty much the view most socialists have, it's very different than the view that capitalists have. Capitalists want to let people be individuals and kind of basically say, do your own thing. Socialists, on the other hand, they want to do it more collectively and kind of tell people this is what needs to be done, and you need to kind of go along with what the majority or the group says. So this is a very important thing to kind of understand and view, because that is what's going on with that. Okay, so in this regard now, like I said, on the face of this, it all kind of sounds good, right? Socialists, they want to kind of remove struggle, inequality. They'd want to provide something like universal basic income, right? So this might sound good on the face of it, because you're like, okay, well, who doesn't want less fortunate people or poor people to have, the stuff that other people have? It's like, of course, you want people to have health care. You want people to have like the means to kind of do their life. You want people to have good education, all these things, right? These are all things that people want. So it's appealing. Socialism's appealing this way because it kind of hits these like emotional things that we know we all want. The problem is, at what cost? Like, at what do we have to do, and what are we taking away or forfeiting in order to achieve this? And as you kind of look more into it, and you see kind of the qualities, the characteristics, and the way you're shaping people through trying to create this like kind of like altruistic outcome, you see that it's kind of creating some negative things, and it's actually doing more damage than good. So I want to kind of go into that and talk about that a little bit. So with that said, the teachings of socialism are counter to self-help and personal development. That's kind of the main theme of this video. Like I said earlier, it's an ideology that conforms to your current level of evolution, just like religion. It's where you currently are as a person, and you might have certain characteristics. You might not, like rich people. You might not like greed. You might not like certain things like this. So then socialism is going to kind of conform to that view of maybe anger, hate, jealousy of this other group of people. It's going to be kind of a driving ideology. It's not so much the definition of means of production or welfare or things like this. It's more this way you view kind of the world and the way you want to shape it around kind of your habits and your base foundational ideology of what you see as good and bad, right and wrong, freedom, and this kind of thing. So it's important to kind of talk about. Now, let me give you a quote here by Manly Palmer Hall, where he mentions this. Okay, so he says, Manly P. Hall says, quote, "The majority of mankind neither desires to improve itself nor to support an organization which demands a high degree of integrity," end quote. So this right here is starting to talk about what I'm saying here. So majority of people don't want to support an organization which demands integrity, right? A high degree of integrity. They don't want to improve themselves. Improving yourself is self-help. Most people don't want that. Most people don't, wake up in the morning and meditate or read or exercise or do anything to kind of evolve themselves. Most people want to like entertain themselves. They want to relax. They want to avoid growth. They want to avoid progress moving forward, and they want to avoid kind of struggling and growing from the struggle, right? So that's kind of what Manly P. Hall is saying with that quote, and that's tying into kind of this self-help thing, that most people aren't interested in developing themselves. If they had the choice, they would avoid struggle, they would avoid development, and they would just be happy to, sit on Facebook and, talk to friends, to watch movies, to listen to music, to go out and do fun things. But they don't want to do those hard things that might in the future make their life better. They'd kind of be more in the moment and kind of more of a short-term thing. People are quite into that, right? So I came across this Jordan Peterson quote a few months back, and he basically said something that really hit home with me, and it really kind of solidified what socialism really is all about. So I want to share that with you. It's not an exact quote. I'm just going to paraphrase because I don't actually remember where it was, but it was something along the lines of this. He said, "Socialism is like the story in the Garden of Eden. Socialists want to remove the very concept of evil from the face of the earth rather than overcome evil." Okay, so that's what Jordan Peterson said. And when I heard that, it really hit me, because this is getting at something way more foundational as a way to characterize socialists than the kind of simple means of production, anti-capitalist definition. It's like, that's not really what they're about. That is kind of a result of something more foundational. That is kind of something that comes afterwards. But more importantly, socialists are about avoiding evil. They're about removing evil. They're about removing hardship, removing struggle, removing adversity. It's about kind of creating more of like a quarantined world where you don't have possibilities of negative things coming at you. They want it like flat. They don't want this difference, right? This is more foundational than what they say they want. And if you group them, this is the ideology and mindset that they have. And it stands in distinction to capitalists and to free market people. Free market people, like myself, they don't mind struggling. They don't mind that the world isn't fair. They don't mind that there are things that you might have to kind of work through and grow from, and that you might have, crap happen to you, and you just got to say, okay, well, that's okay. I can either hold on to it and, say I'm a victim and complain and complain and complain, or I can say, that stuff happens. Let's just move on and let's focus on what I want to do, right? This is foundational self-help stuff, and this is foundational socialist ideology. Socialists, they want to avoid struggle, right? So when you are exercising, right, you strengthen your muscles when you lift weights, when you exert force on them, when you use them. You're utilizing this muscle in order to grow. It's just like that with our mind. When you are working your mind, when you're educating yourself, when you're thinking, you are growing your mind. When you're just practicing things in life and trying new things and working creatively, these are all things that strengthen you and help you grow. And socialists at the core want to remove this struggle and this hardship aspect, right? You have like a poor person. Rather than having the poor person find a way out of poverty, they want to just kind of give them something to make it to where they don't have to learn that lesson, to exercise that self-responsibility and that aspect of like owning yourself, to where you're able to make decisions on your own and to where you don't need others to keep bailing you out. I mean, this is basic self-help stuff. And this is what socialism is against. This is what socialists as a group of people are less inclined to be in favor of. They're not into this self-help type stuff because they want to more play a victim and, hold on to these kind of more negative habits in order to kind of get their way, kind of like a child. This is what is going on. So we really need to let that sink in and view it more from that view. It's not as much about what they say. It's about wanting to remove hardship, wanting to remove struggle, wanting to remove elements that bring growth. It's like a sports team, right? So in sports, if a team sucks, they could try to cheat, right? They could try to, do something to the opponent's team. They could try to injure a player, remove a player. They could try to change the adversity in order to kind of bring down a greater aspect, a greater opponent. They could try to bring them down rather than try to bring themselves up, right? So self-help teaches you not to bring others down. It teaches you to elevate yourself and to figure out what you can do to become better, to where you are growing. It's not about bringing everyone down to this low level. It's about bringing people up to a higher level. And so when you look at like a sports analogy, it's the same thing. A socialist would be the one trying to bring the team down, to cheat, to hurt them, to overcome having to actually take responsibility themselves and find a way to become better themselves, become competitive themselves. They don't want to do that. They want to remove this challenge. They want to remove the thing that's going to make them better. The very thing that's going to make them better, they want to remove, right? It's like an immune system. If you have your immune system, you have, different diseases, viruses, bacteria, and stuff happening. Your immune system doesn't say, or it doesn't try to remove all disease from the world, all bacteria. It's like, what does that even mean? Like, what's good, what's bad? It doesn't try to remove any adversity that might face the body. No, it takes it all in, and in an anti-fragile way, it finds a way to overcome it all. Anything that you throw at the body, it is constantly trying to find ways to strengthen itself and to overcome this adversity, this virus, this bacteria, this struggle, this thing that is making it uncomfortable. It overcomes. It doesn't remove that thing. It just finds a way to make it to where that thing does not have power over itself. Super important stuff. And that is kind of the core of socialism. Now let me read you a few quotes, because when it comes to self-help, we all know like self-help is kind of what we strive for and want. It's just when push comes to shove, we, make excuses, and then it's like we don't actually practice it. Like, I can read you these quotes, and, for the most part, you're going to say, yeah, that pretty much makes sense. But then when it actually comes to living it, facing a challenge in your life, and having to actually, coincide with what it says, most people just don't do it. Like Manly P. Hall said, most people don't want to support an organization that requires a high degree of integrity, right? It's like people don't want to work on changing themselves. Are you crazy? People don't want to do that, even though they know they should. And that's just, bad habits. That's just not having kind of the wisdom or the practice to kind of put it into action and actually change yourself for the better. So let's go through this. Okay, so Arnold Schwarzenegger, quote, "Strength does not come from winning. Your struggles develop your strengths. When you go through hardships and decide not to surrender, that is strength," end quote. Okay. Angie Fenimore, quote, "Life's supposed to be hard. We can't skip over the hard parts. We must earn what we receive," end quote. Okay. Jesus says, quote, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction. And many enter through it, but small is the gate and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it," end quote. All right, so Jesus right there talking about kind of how the wide gate, right, the kind of easy thing, the thing that most people do, that's most common, generally not going to strengthen you, not going to lead to kind of a greater life, it's not going to lead to kind of where you want to be. Okay, so Manly P. Hall, he says, quote, "We all want the good things of life. We all desire to be surrounded by friends, but we have no right to expect to attract any of these things, except when our own lives have earned us the right to be honored, respected, and admired." Okay, end quote. Another one, Michael Jordan says, "I can accept failure, but I can't accept not trying." Right, so this is all just basic self-help stuff. I mean, just basic stuff most people are going to agree with. Seth Godin says, "Safe is risky." Right, because if you always take the safe path, you're not going to be strengthened to handle something that might be more challenging or hard, right? It's like if you always avoid, you're like super clean freak, you avoid strengthening your immune system. Now, as soon as something happens to it, it's not going to be as strong enough to overcome it, right? Safe is risky. Teddy Roosevelt, "Pray not for lighter burdens, but for stronger backs." Thomas Jefferson, "I find that the harder I work, the more luck I seem to have." Right? So these people are all saying kind of similar stuff. These are all people a lot of us respect in different ways. Thomas Edison says, quote, "Genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration," end quote. And then Walt Disney, "The way to get started is to quit talking and begin doing." Right? So these are kind of quotes along the lines of self-help, that kind of stuff, and they have kind of a similar view of what they're saying, right? And then you can contrast this with a socialist, Bob Black, who says, quote, "No one should ever work," end quote. And that sums their ideology up perfectly, because that is more so their mindset is kind of avoiding work, avoiding kind of anything that strengthens you or that might be hard or struggling. It's like their whole thing is about not having to have things that are contrary to what you want. It's like about avoiding anything that can shake your foundation, that can shake your world. It's like they want to live in a quarantine type environment. Okay, so let's talk about some of these habits, right? So socialists will say they care about poor people, right? But if you look more into it, it's not that they care about poor people. It's that they're hateful and envious of rich people. They don't like rich people. They would much rather everyone be poor than have some poor people and some rich people and some middle class people. They want everyone the same at their level, and they don't want people who might have, worked harder or achieved more to have more. They just don't want that. It's a negative character trait of like envy and hate and that type of thing. And let's look at that. So if you take a look at this chart here, you will see the successful people, right, and unsuccessful people. You see different traits and kind of habits between them all. And I mean, if you look this up anywhere, it's going to have similar type stuff going on. This is all kind of obvious stuff that is obvious to people, right? This isn't controversial by any means. So if you look at the unsuccessful side, right, you'll see, let me just go through a few of them. Like, okay, unsuccessful people have a sense of entitlement, right? So socialists feel that they are entitled to things simply for being human. Socialists want to steal from productive people and give it to unproductive people. Socialists feel that they are victims who are held down by the evil capitalists who produce, right? They feel entitled to having things. They feel like they don't have to earn them, that they're just entitled to it, right? Okay, socialists criticize. They criticize capitalism. Their very ideology itself isn't a creation of what can be done. It's a negation of what to remove. They want to destroy capitalism rather than build something better, right? So they hold a grudge. Socialists hold a grudge against rich people. Shame on you for producing. If you're rich, you're lucky. If you're rich, you inherited, right? They never view rich people for what it is. People finding a way to create, a surplus of value and have that, and then pass it on to their children if, a child inherits it. They don't view it that way. They view it as, they have a grudge over these kind of people. Blame others for their failures, right? So there's a big one with socialists. Low quality people never take credit for their mistakes, and that's why they continue to make them over and over again. When socialism is attempted throughout the world and has a track record of millions of deaths and utter failure, most socialists don't take credit for it. They write it off as not real socialism, call it state capitalism or some other label. Socialists, they can't possibly fathom that something isn't right with their ideology, and as such, it isn't socialism that's wrong, it's everything else, right? They're always going to blame. That's a negative habit, a bad habit. That is not something higher quality people are going to practice, right? Socialists think they know it all. They think they have the answer to everything. They're completely arrogant, and you'll never hear them say, I don't know, or you may be right? Socialists secretly hope others fail. Their entire ideology is built on capitalism failing, despite their ideology also requiring capitalism to pave the way so they can steal the wealth of it. Think about that. Their ideology requires capitalism as a groundwork, yet they hate capitalism. So yeah, we could go on and on with these examples. This is basic self-help stuff, basic good habits, right? You look at any kind of self-help book, any type of wisdom teaching along the lines of how to become a better person. It's going to it's not going to promote those habits, it's going to promote more the good habits, the being happy with what you have, the, working hard, the integrity, the responsibility, these kind of things, right? Basic stuff. And these are more so, by far, in alignment with capitalism and free markets than they are with socialism. Socialism as an ideology and as a whole, and as a group of people, they much more gravitate to bad habits. And why is that? Because that's what lower quality people adhere to. That's what resonates with them. To them, life is a negative that's holding them back. So rather than seeing like a negative as a way to overcome it, they just view it as a negative that's happening and that they're a victim of it, and that there's nothing they can do and they're being held down, and that they're, that they're powerless and that they can't even be happy, even if it's a situation that they can't necessarily control. They just don't have the wisdom to understand that nothing can affect like their mental ability or their happiness inside, no matter what's happening. They don't resonate with that higher form of wisdom teaching that we learn, in self-help and other philosophical teachings. They have a totally different view, takes kind of more of a negative victim mentality. So, yeah, socialism, you just blame everyone but yourself. In capitalism, you take responsibility for yourself. That's kind of why you have this kind of individualistic aspect of capitalism and free markets, where it's not that capitalism is anti-groups or anti-cooperation. It's just that at the most fundamental level, we are individuals who make our own decisions and have power over ourselves. But when you are less developed and able to take that responsibility and claim that power, you're going to want to indirectly kind of give it away to somebody else. And you're going to want to ignore that you have it and pretend that you're a victim and that somebody else is holding you down. That's just kind of how it goes. And that is kind of the main difference between all this, right? So we hear it all the time. Socialists care about poor people, right? But what about poor people? What about, these other kind of more individualistic aspects that don't care about poor people? It's like, if you really care about poor people, then we need to like find a way to equalize it and this kind of thing, right? But the question is, how do socialists help poor people? Because you can't just help them without having it come from somewhere or without taking it from somewhere or doing something, right? And socialists want to basically take from more responsible people. They want to take from people with better habits, and they want to steal wealth from them and, reallocate it to poor people. And if you kind of look at the bigger picture of that, it might not necessarily be the best strategy, because it makes everyone poorer as a whole, because you're kind of taking away that productive element, and you're basically taking resources from what drives production and wealth, and you're basically rewarding what doesn't drive production and wealth, and you're putting energy on that. It's kind of a bigger topic, but that is kind of what's going on with the poor people thing. So it's like, if you really want to help poor people, then you should help them with your own resources, right? You shouldn't try to interfere with somebody else and make them help them. It's like, you help them if you really care about them, because people are free to do what they want with their resources. This is kind of back to that freedom thing, where socialists view freedom as forcing somebody to do something, where capitalist free market people, they view freedom as being left alone and being able to do what they want with their own resources, with their own, with the effects of what their work and energy has created, right? And if they want to help poor people, they will. And they do through charity and through churches and these types of institutions. If you look at charity, right? So we have welfare kind of, right? That's forced upon us by the state. And this charity, about 80% of this resources, the wealth of this, gets basically lost, through the bureaucracy, through, different institutions, fees, all these different pieces that don't actually get the money or the funds or the help to the people supposedly helping, right? Where like a church or some other more private charity where people voluntarily give money, these are much, much, much better at helping people, because they have to get a result in order to get funded. So when you have like a government institution where you're forcing people, kind of the more socialistic way, you want to force a group to do something, you aren't as accountable, because the people aren't voluntarily giving their money. They're not choosing to kind of promote an institution a certain way, and as a result, the people who run that institution, they're going to view it differently. A state that takes in funds, through taxes, they know that money's coming no matter what. And ironically, the worse job they do, the more money they usually get, because they say they need more money to do a better job. So if welfare is not helping people and the state's not doing a very good job at it, rather than finding a way to help people better, they're going to say we need more money in order to help them better. And you haven't fixed the system, right? You have like this leak, this hole in a boat, and rather than fixing the hole, you just keep, adding more water into it. And you just keep thinking that by adding more funds, you're going to somehow fix this problem. Where the private charity, they have to get results for people. They have to do a good job, like a church. They need to help people. So they're going to find ways to actually help people so that people want to give them money because they see like, okay, good, you're helping people and it's actually working. I mean, this is obvious stuff. The free market, like almost always does a better job than the non-free market system, right? Voluntary markets just work way better. And it's obvious why, because, it practices kind of these self-help characteristics. When you have a private charity like a church, their goal is going to be to strengthen the individual, to teach them kind of the wisdom and the ability to, take responsibility and power over themselves and find ways to create wealth themselves and to, have their unique value and this kind of thing, just basic stuff. Where with a non-voluntary charity, like through the state welfare, you just don't have that same incentive, that same dynamic going on. They're just going to throw money at, but they don't care what happens to the person. They don't care. They don't watch them the way a private institution would and private money would. So, yeah, you have this kind of problem going on with this. So, there's an important thing to realize here. So socialists, they conflate choices with circumstance. Okay, so what does this mean? Socialists almost always view like a negative situation for somebody as something that they are not responsible for. Again, back to that self-responsibility thing. So if somebody's poor, socialists are always going to say they're poor because they're unfortunate. Because surely nobody would ever choose to be poor. But that's simply not the case. People choose to be poor all the time. People do make bad decisions. People do have character traits and habits of themselves that set themselves up to be poor. And unfortunately, socialists continue to support that and continue to allow it to happen rather than confront it and say, okay, look, you're poor. What do you need to change in order to change this reality, right? And again, if somebody wants to be poor, that's totally fine. Let them be poor. Who cares? Who says you need to be rich? If somebody wants to be poor and they're happy, do whatever the freaking heck you want. So that's kind of weird anyway. It's like we should let people do what they want. If people want to be poor, fine. But if you want to make somebody not poor, you have to teach them how not to be. And it starts with kind of, working on yourself and this self-help stuff rather than saying you're poor because of circumstance. So of course, there's maybe 1% people, 2% of people that, yeah, they're in a predicament. Maybe they're handicapped, mentally challenged, whatever. There's these there's these aspects that you don't really have control over that do suck. And it's yeah, that is more circumstance. But the vast, vast, vast majority of people, especially in first world countries with relatively free markets, the vast majority of people, they are poor by choice. They are poor by habits. All you have to do is hang out with some poor people for once. Go hang around poor people, go talk to them, go see the choices they make, live with them, and see how they act. It's so freaking obvious. The way that they work, the way that they might get money and spend it immediately, rather than find ways to save, the way that they might spend money on entertainment rather than save it, the way that they might spend money eating out, or the way they might spend money on things that could be cheaper. It's it's not complicated. And of course, a lot of poor people, they don't even hold jobs, right? They might not show up to work because they're out doing something else or they're lazy, things like this. I mean, there's a lot of variables, but most people are poor by choice because in first world countries, not being poor is pretty easy to do. Complete high school, right? Don't get married. Don't have kids until you're married, and keep a job. I mean, if you do these three things, you're going to become middle class. It's not that complicated. But doing those three things is a lot harder than it sounds, especially for poor people. It requires a certain level of mentality and responsibility in order to sustain that and achieve that. And most people aren't going to do that. Instead, they're going to play the victim and say, oh, I had this happen in my life and this was a problem and blah, 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 blah. Of course, it's that's what losers are going to do. They're going to make excuses. That's what a losing football team's going to do. They're going to say, oh, this team cheated. The ref was on their side, blah, 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 rather than saying, what can I do to change no matter what crap comes my way? People don't do that. So yeah, that is what happens with socialists, is that they incorrectly conflate choice and circumstance. they put it way more on circumstance when it's the exact opposite. It's mostly choice, because pretty much anybody, if they're not disabled and like fairly reasonable person in the first world, they can become non-poor if they choose to. They just have to choose to, and they have to do the habits and the work that it takes to get there. And if they don't want to, that's fine. Who cares? Then just don't complain. Don't force other people to take care of you and say that you need to be taken care of because you're choosing something that other people are choosing not to do. It's not that complicated, and it's quite manipulative. So Wayne Dyer says, quote, "When you abandon making choices, you enter the vast world of excuses," end quote. Right? And this is Wayne Dyer, like, self-help spiritual teacher. I mean, totally like a non-controversial guy saying something that is quite controversial, because it's saying that choices and excuses are kind of contrasted. It's just crazy. Okay, so let's see here. So the thing is, world poverty is declining, right? If you look at this chart here, global poverty and economic freedom, right? From, 1975 to 2015 or so. You can see here the percentage of population living below a certain dollar value, right? And economic freedom of the world, right? So economic freedom is going up. And as economic freedom goes up, you see that wealth and the amount of money that people are making is also going up. So the people living under certain amounts going down. So just by looking at this chart, and I mean, this data is everywhere. This is not like, oh, where are your sources? Where's your data? Just look at it. It's anywhere. Capitalism is absolutely destroying poverty for obvious reasons. It's obvious because capitalism mirrors and mimics and follows self-help, where socialism does not. Socialism doesn't create wealth because it doesn't create people responsible and capable of building a reality that they want. It doesn't create people that are able to support themselves. Socialism it's like a parasite that needs a host to take from, rather than finding out how to become a host itself. These are basic self-help principles, and it's obvious why, as more and more of the world adopts capitalism and free markets, that poverty declines. Because people are becoming more capable, they're having opportunities that they did not have before, and it's able to mirror a better way. It's able to mirror more closely principles that allow for more productivity, more joyful living, and for more wealth, for more prosperity. It's like advancing. It's an evolutionary type principle rather than something that's going to be regressive and pull down. So, yeah, that is an important thing to think about in regards to poverty and all that. So, basically, what I'm trying to say with this is it's hard to be a socialist and champion self-development because you realize that self-development is an individual thing, right? If you listen to all the great spiritual teachers, self-help people, they're going to tell you it's about going within. It's about this individualistic journey of kind of becoming yourself and claiming your power. And this is totally contrary to socialism. And it's problematic for socialism because you need to develop yourself, and you need this individualistic aspect if you want to move forward in life. You can't do it as a group. I mean, you can. Of course, we work together. But if you're leaning on a group, you're not going to be developing yourself. If you're making excuses, if you're blaming others and you're not taking responsibility, it's kind of obvious what's going on with all this, right? So when you see somebody who has something unfair happen to them under socialism, right? Socialists are going to say something must be done. While under capitalism, free markets, people are going to say, shit happens, tough luck, move on. Just move on. Who cares? Stuff happens like that all the time, right? Socialists are going to hang on to it and just let it linger and let it build and create anger and frustration, where capitalist free market people, they're just going to be like, whatever, let me just move on and continue what I'm happy about, passionate about, and just keep moving forward, right? So in socialism, If somebody's born poor, right, they're going to say, rich people suck. Rich people are lucky, I can never be rich. I hate evil capitalism, right? This is what poor people, socialists that are born poor are going to say, right? Where in self-help, if you're, capitalism, if you're born poor, you're going to say, how can I be like them? What choices did they make that led to them being rich? What qualities do they possess? You're going to look at it a totally different way. You're going to say, I want to be like that. I can be like that. You're not going to say like, oh, I can't never do that. Or like, it's just like, this is self-help stuff. This is kind of creating the reality you want based off of your thoughts and your actions and this kind of thing. Basic self-help stuff, right? So what happens is socialists, they're losing in life. Just like a sports team loses in a game, right? Like a little league team, like a kids team, when they lose, they're going to make excuses. But a good team, a good athlete, they're not going to make excuses. They're going to take responsibility and figure out what they can do better, right? Socialists are losing at life, so they're going to make excuses. Of course they're going to make excuses. Of course they're going to try to bring other people down. That's exactly what that ideology does. That is what a non-self-help ideology believes. So of course they're going to attack people and say that, no, you were lucky, you had this, blah, blah, blah. Just excuse after excuse because they don't want to take responsibility and make choices, just like Wayne Dyer said, just like Manly P. Hall said. This is all quite obvious and clear if you kind of view it in this lens, right? So, yeah, that's basically what's going on here, right? It's about walking away from socialism. It's about understanding it as kind of this victim ideology, about this loser mentality, about this anti-self-help aspect. And as soon as you kind of see that for what it is and understand the principles that socialists are practicing, you can see kind of these other principles that you're going to see entrepreneurs, like athletes that win, like all the people that are doing well and happy with life for the most part. They're playing by a totally different rule book. They're playing by this self-help rule book of self-actualization, personal responsibility, and all this stuff I've been talking about. Read a few self-help books and say, like, is this author a socialist or a capitalist? It's like obvious, like almost all self-help is free market capitalist type thinking. It's that type of mentality. It's the exact opposite of this victim, this, everything's against me type mentality. And that's what I really wanted to get across with this video because, we hear a lot about these kind of socialist definitions. We might think like it's good and whatnot, but at the core, it's something much more foundational. And it's that anti-self-help aspect of socialism, which I think is the biggest problem and the biggest thing to recognize. So thank you for listening, everyone. Please subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends if you're into this kind of stuff. And I will be back real soon and I will see you then. So take care. Bye-bye.